So nice to be with everybody this morning. We'll get started in maybe just another minute, give folks a chance to settle, and whatever you need to do to find a comfortable, stable, relatively upright sitting posture for our meditation time. Take a little time and look at the community. And people are always welcomed in the few minutes before we sit, put something into the chat, just a greeting, introduce yourself. If you're new, say where you're from, for example. But just if you like that. But I always mention that we have to get creative. You know, this new Zoom world, it's not going away. And how to feel community even when we're not in the same space together, I think is really important. And it will take some effort, just like, you know, we've all learned how to feel, you know, hopefully, how to belong, how to be part of community when we're in person together, what feels right given our temperament, our personalities. And it's the same thing here. It's just a little weirder because it's new. And but it won't help to disengage or to be grumpy about the reality of the Zoom world. You know, it has some advantages, like that we can actually be here now together, and it has some disadvantages. But for us, you know, Buddhism generally is a very pragmatic practice. So the interesting question is, how can we make it work as best it can work? That's what's really important. And that's also just strategically when you have your video on. It's totally makes sense to me, at least, to some of us not to want to have our video on all the time. But that doesn't mean it might not make sense to have it on briefly, like at the very beginning of a program or the last 2 minutes of a program, just to sort of say, hey, I'm here and I'm willing, you know, for you to see me because I'm here and I want everyone to know that I'm here. And yeah, these small things add up. So just keep that in mind. And, you know, another little thing that's so sweet from some of the longer term community members or those of you who are really quick with technology, you know, if I mention something, I notice sometimes people will put the link, understanding, oh, maybe somebody doesn't know what that Pali word is. So let me put something down in the chat, or maybe people don't know how to find that book that Mark just mentioned, and they'll put the link to the book. So those sorts of ways of being in this online community together, yeah, it makes it a much more sweet community experience that we're all sort of figuring out together. So let's go ahead. We've been learning this very well-known chant from early Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism. And sometimes it's just referred to as the impermanence chant. I'll go ahead and put the link, and I'll put the same link a little bit later as more people join in. But for those of you who would like to chant along with me, I have you all muted, of course, but you could still chant along with me by opening up that link that I just put in. And look for that impermanence chant. We'll do it in Pali, and then we traditionally do the chant 3 times in the Pali language, which is that ancient language that the Buddhist teachings were recorded in, you know, over 2,000 years ago. And then we'll read the English together. And it's just interesting. It's not just a chant to do at a memorial service or a funeral, but really every day just to reflect. Because as I'll talk about today after the sit, coming into alignment with the truth of impermanence, that life is changing, is always in motion, and in that way ephemeral, in the sense of not solid, in the way our thoughts make experience appear to be. The thought of me, Mark, or the thought of Minneapolis, or the thought of Common Ground Meditation Center, or the thought of you, all these ideas, these conceptual ideas, can create the appearance of solidity in a way that our experience is just not that way. So part of developing wisdom, which is the topic for today, as we move through the 10 paramis, these 10 beautiful qualities of the heart that are taught in early Buddhism, wisdom being the fourth, after generosity, moral sensitivity, renunciation, and then the fourth is wisdom. It's really realizing how wonderful, actually, it works really well to live in accordance with impermanence, as opposed to at war with impermanence. Just like the beauty industry, it's like the last thing we want to do is look like an older person. And I mean, it's such a setup because it's going to happen. and yet so much of our economy and so much of our psychic energy is about, sort of being at war with reality. Now, how does that work for us? Not very well. It creates a lot of suffering. So let's do this chant together. I'll go ahead and paste it again in case some of you have just come on. You can open up that link and we'll begin our sit with this chant. Anicca vata sankara upadavaya damino upajitu va nirushanti te sang upasamo sukho. Anicca vata sankara upadavaya damino upajitu va niruchanti te sang upasamo sukho. Anicca vata sankara upadavaya damino upajitu va niruchanti te sang upasamo sukho. And now the English translation. All conditioned things arise and pass away. Understanding this deeply leads to the greatest happiness, which is peace. And we'll settle into our meditation time now. Making any final adjustments, doing the best we can to find a stable and relatively upright and relatively still sitting posture for the next 35 minutes or so. This sense of truly belonging right here, right now, embodied, willing to feel what we're feeling right now, right here. Not afraid to be sensitive. Not afraid to be exposed to what it feels like to be sitting. Soft, curious even. And it's not so much that we are looking for some answer, some conceptual answer about what's happening. I mentioned this simile of the river last week for those who were here. But just notice in your own subjective, actual, embodied experience now, notice the similarities with a river right here. The river of sensation, for example. That the experience of sensation, the experience of physicality, is really a river, a movement of sensation. There's nothing static about it. Sometimes when we're resisting the sensations, the experience of the body can feel solid, static. But when we learn that it's okay to relax and soften and allow and trust, well, then the mind, the heart, sees more clearly that embodiment is a river, a ceaselessly moving, changing river. Can we trust this river by softening a little bit more, allowing a little bit more deeply? The river of this life. And in this river, we also include the more subtle river of emotional feeling in our sensitive heart. So there's this whole spectrum of feeling, from the more ordinary physical sensations of hardness and softness and weight and lightness and warmth and coolness. But there's also a river, you could say a river of emotionality. Even when we feel numb or the feeling, the emotional feeling is nondescript, well, that's a feeling that's moving like a river right through the sensitive heart, always moving. The heart, the sensitive heart, is always feeling this underlying feeling. For some right now, it might be a kind of wormy anxiety. For others, it might be a lightness, a buoyancy, a happiness. But whatever that movement of feeling tone, emotionality, whatever that is, can we, in a sense, really embrace this more subtle river of our life that's right here, always moving. It's just the way that it is now. And we don't need to second guess it. We don't need to control it or judge it. We let the body move. We let the feeling that's being felt in the heart move. And we even give permission to mental activity, thought, and mental images. We don't have to put the brakes on anything. Just a willingness to be sensitive, to be mindfully aware of all these rivers that together make up what we call my life. Right now, right here. The movement of the heart, the movement of the mind, the movement of the body. And then every once in a while, maybe quite often, because of habit, the mind might react, might get tight, fall into a habit of controlling or judging or wanting or fearing. But we'll know this because there's some suffering, there's some tightness, contraction. And the important thing here is to see these times of being tight as a teacher. Oh, this is interesting. The body, the heart, the mind's getting tight. What's happening? Can I get interested? Can I relax and be curious? And let this experience reveal itself. What's not being seen or felt here? Nothing, really, nothing is more interesting to the heart, to the wisdom in the heart, than learning something new about how it is that suffering arises and how it is that suffering ceases, how it is that everything gets tight, and how it is that things unwind and loosen up and feel more free. This is what the heart is truly interested in when we're not deluded by superficial things. So let's continue in silence, and when you do get lost in thought and need to begin again, just bring up this image of a river that's right here. The grosser part of the river is just the movement of physicality, and it's just more subtle movements of feeling, emotional feeling, mental activity. Can we be in the middle of the river, not being thrown off by our likes and dislikes, by fear and hope, but just let the river move and appreciate the freedom and letting the river move. So we'll continue now in silence. learning how to be right in the middle, right in the river of the present moment, sensations in motion, emotional feelings, mental activity in motion, just being curious about where we feel and find resistance, and where and when we find a sense of flow and the freedom of non-resistance. We're just curious about that, just in the most immediate and direct way. Moments of freedom, release, non-resistance, and moments of tightness, resistance, and struggle. And in this way, we just become wiser about how it is that things get tight and how it is that things release. Just in this simple, immediate way, being curious about what's right here, how the heart is relating to the river of my life. And in a way, the most subtle part of this way of meditating is learning to recognize the river of desire. And we're finding, like, to stay in that flow of the river, we have to feel the river of desire without being confused by it. And we know we're confused by that river when we take desire personally and they get tight, or when we think desire is bad and get tight in that way. So desire is just another frequency of the river, wanting this, not wanting that. Can we feel the river of desire, the movement of desire, desiring, without being confused? It's just nature to desire. Doesn't mean we act it out. We don't believe that desire is me talking to myself. It's just that impulse in the heart to want, to not want. Part of what it means to be a human being is that there is this river of desiring. It just comes with the territory of being a human being. So we don't want to be afraid of it, we don't want to hate it, but we also don't want to be pushed around by desire. We want to understand that it's nature and not self. And how much freedom there is in understanding freedom. Oh, freedom, or the freedom of feeling desire without being governed or pushed around by it. So take a moment and stretch your body if you need to, just to feel at ease in your sitting posture. And a big welcome for anybody who's new this morning, and morning in Minneapolis at least. And we've been looking at the 10 paramis, as I mentioned, the beautiful qualities of the heart, sometimes paramis translated as the 10 perfections, in the sense that traditionally it's thought of as the qualities of the heart that the Buddha to be developed in his mind, in his heart, in his personality, so that upon his awakening, it both supported the deep insight and then allowed the Buddha to share what he had come to understand with his own awakening process with others. And these qualities, no one is going to argue developing generosity and moral sensitivity and this capacity. Renunciation is really, it's an insight and a sort of a development where I still have my habits and the impulses of my heart and mind, my conditioning, but I'm not governed because I have this newly developed talent of renunciation. So I can feel the impulse to want to get even with you because you hurt my feelings, but I can feel that impulse to want to push back, hit back, but I can renounce that impulse. So that's, the most basic way renunciation works is we're a human being. We have the push and pulls that come with having a personality, having been conditioned by culture. But renunciation can feel and see that, and it's the beginning of the capacity not to do just what our habits tell us to do. There's so much freedom just on that level of wisdom of renunciation. And then that leads to this next topic that we started last week, this fourth parami, beautiful quality of the heart of wisdom. And really understanding wisdom from this Buddhist perspective. One of the sort of defining qualities of the river that we're in the middle of, our life is these rivers, right? These movements, these ceaseless movements, is that all of the movements, subtle and gross, all of them are lawful. They're all conditional. And in Buddhism, we call this lawfulness karma, the law of karma. And it's an insight to realize because it undermines habits of helplessness. We feel helpless when we think something's happening, but it's not lawful. Either we personify it like somebody's out to get me, like life is hard and somebody's out to get me and it ain't fair. We feel betrayed. Or we just think it's random or we make up something. But the more we pay attention, not that we can discern or read all of the forces that are behind the lawfulness of this moment, but we can sense and discern enough to become fully convinced that we live in a lawful universe. And doesn't mean we're in charge of everything that's in motion. There's a lot, of course, that we're not in charge of. So stuff is happening not because of something I did, but there are other causes besides my, the intentions in my mind. But still, it really helps that awakening into the lawfulness. So I talked a little bit about this last week when I was introducing wisdom as one of the paramis, one of the 10 beautiful qualities, because it's a real powerful shift in our life when we realize that it matters. Like there's a lot of emotion, it's lawful. There's a lot of what's emotion that I'm not affecting, but it's still lawful. Like weather, I don't have a lot to say about weather. I don't affect the weather, not much at least. And but I can understand that it's lawful. But there are some things that I more directly affect, like the quality of the intention in my heart and whether or not I act on that intention. that can really affect my experience, my subjective experience as a human being. So if I have an impulse to say something to somebody and I sense that that impulse is not very helpful and I refrain from saying it, that has a profound effect on how my life unfolds. As opposed to I have that same impulse, I don't sense that it's unskillful, and I act on it, and I set in motion a lot of, there's a lot of reverberations. That person doesn't like me, or this and that happens. And then all of that can set in motion other stuff, and then other stuff. And it can have huge long-term implications, all because of one's motivation or intention. This has become, like in later Buddhist traditions, I think in the Tibetan tradition, they have a teaching that everything rests on the tip of motivation or on the quality of one's intention. So even though I'm not in charge of the weather, and even though there's so many historical, forces moving through our culture with roots far back in our human history, ignorances and biases and all kinds of tendencies in our wider natural world, in our cultural worlds. There's a lot of forces that I don't have much say about. But how I'm relating, the quality of my mind, the quality of intention and motivation that are arising right now, and what motivations, what intentions I act on, and which motivations and intentions I feel I'm not repressing, but I don't act on, that actually has a lot to say about how my life unfolds. We tend to give much more weight on these external things that we don't have much say over, like the time and place where we were born and family we grew up in, but it's in a way it reinforces this wrong idea of helplessness, because we sort of give what power we have over to these things we have no control over. And in a way, we, unconsciously, I think, it gives us an out. I don't actually have to act in my life as if it matters, because I've convinced myself it doesn't matter, because there are all these bigger forces acting on my life. And because of all those external forces acting on my life that I don't control, it makes sense for me to give up. Or it makes sense for me to just get as comfortable as I can and ride it out, my life out, until it ends, because there's really nothing to do. And in a way, I think it's appropriate, and this relates to this parami of wisdom, to sort of, just to kind of make it simplistic, one half, when there's not a lot of wisdom in our heart and mind, really not thinking there's much to do with our human life, except to ride it out, try not to fall into too many holes, and but basically seek out an easy ride until it's over. As opposed to what I might, in the way that I define someone with a spiritual orientation, interested in Dharma. The Buddha didn't teach Buddhism, he taught Dharma, which means the way it is, right? He came up with a set of practices that allows us to align our life with the way it is. So mindfulness, being wisely aware of the way it is a way of coming into alignment, instead of being in alignment with our deluded ideas that come from culture, how we've been conditioned in our instincts as mammals. We can cultivate this stability of present moment awareness, this continuity of present moment awareness, this wise, mindful awareness. And it forces our understanding to come into alignment with the way it is. It will replace our cultural conditioning slowly over time as we collect data. Like the more mindful we are with the way it is, the more our habits of understanding, our habits of viewing things get challenged by the new data of being in alignment with the way it is, seeing things as they are, just in ordinary ways. So, wisdom is really about realizing, oh, you know what? There's actually something to do with my life. I can undertake a systematic training. I know we don't like that word because life already feels like a lot of work. And then somebody on Sunday morning says, yeah, and you know what? You should get involved in training your heart. And it's only going to take, I don't know, 200, 300, 400 lifetimes. You should go for it. And then it starts to make sense. Oh, no, I think I'll just ride it out and try to be as comfortable as I can and hope for the best. Which is why the Buddha taught, he would use very provocative teachings about how long human beings, because there is this idea even before the time of the Buddha about rebirth. And he would say things, in the countless lifetimes doing the same thing, getting the same result that we've lived, we have cried more tears than the 4 oceans. That's a lot of tears, right? Just doing the same thing, getting the same results. Basically, identifying with desire, identifying with hate and with greed, identifying with our patterns of distraction and denial and delusion, and getting the natural result, which is being tight, being afraid, feeling empty, and that not in the Buddhist sense of the word, but hollow, or something needs to fill this void. So it's sort of the background of all of our greed for whatever, for lunch, for a relationship, for whatever it might be that we long for. But basically some uneasy sense that this isn't it, this isn't enough, contentment doesn't make sense, ease doesn't make sense, because this moment is not okay. That's really the root. Ignorance is that arrogant conclusion that this isn't okay. Now, I know that, even in my own privileged life, it seems very clear that this moment isn't okay. And I know that people have circumstances that are truly not okay in terms of physical, emotional, social suffering, being oppressed, being taken advantage of, being abused, experiencing tremendous physical pain, emotional pain, mental pain, spiritual pain. There is a lot of suffering. But there's what comes with that suffering is a superficial sense that I know enough about the suffering that my reaction to it is justified, like to run or to get tight. So we lack curiosity about human suffering. And then that's the doing the same thing, getting the same result, because we haven't stabilized our life enough so that we have the stability to be interested in suffering, our own and the world's suffering. And one of the things that happens in life as we practice more is it doesn't really make sense just to talk about or think about our own suffering, because as we become more sensitive, we feel the injustices, we feel the cumulative and the wider suffering, not even just of other humans, but of the planet and the species on the planet, other creatures that we share the planet with. We'll feel that. It's like once we know about industrial agriculture and what happens to the animals, or once we, take the time to do a deep study about the roots of racism or the roots of sexism or the roots of all the ways economic injustice, all the ways that power takes advantage of those with less power, it just naturally and appropriately breaks our heart open. Doesn't mean we suddenly have answers, but it means that we have a more honest relationship, and we're more humble about just doing what we've always done and getting the same results. And in that humility comes real curiosity, which is one of the essential qualities of wisdom, that humility and curiosity. And it's kind of the opposite of what we think, when we use that word in English, wisdom. And not always, but often it's kind of equated with somebody who has a lot of knowledge. And, there's some power and often arrogance when we're a master of something, because once we're a real master at something, we recognize how little other people know. Oh, I could do that. I know that. But this experience we're actually having as a human being, it's like once we realize that everything matters, and that how I'm relating, how I'm participating, how I'm relating in particular to my habits of mind and to my present moment experience, it really matters. And how easy it is for me in any moment just to be operating on autopilot, where the habits dominate and basically govern how I'm responding, what I'm saying, what I'm thinking, what I'm doing. And then I get the natural results of those habits. Some habits, of course, are more wholesome than others. But we're planting seeds all the time. We have a lot of humility because it just makes so much sense to be more attentive, more sensitive. And any kind of arrogant certainty just gets in the way of being mindfully aware. We have to choose at some point as we go along this path, of really seeing the value in being mindful, being mindfully aware of the present moment. We start to realize there's a profound choice. I can either be the one who thinks he knows what's up and what's down, or I can be mindful. But I can't actually be both at the same time, because mindfulness, being aware, mindfully aware in this continuous way, means that any kind of certainty or fixed idea is falling into the background. It can't be the dominant force in the mind, that fixed idea. It's like, try it next time you're going to hang out with your partner or your friend and you lead with a fixed idea. You sort of miss you miss the person, because they're a living, changing, literally wild thing. Our friends, our partners, our kids, or whatever, our pets, our community, at work, our neighborhood, whatever. It's wild. Life, nature, experience, in the sense that it can't be really defined by our idea of our partner, of our community, of this situation. So that's a nice way for us, like homework. And this could work too for a small group discussion. And remember, we always have small groups. Nancy and Shannon help organize them at the end of this program for the last 15 minutes. People are strongly encouraged to stay. I know it won't make sense for everyone. It's totally fine not to be part of the small groups. And a lot of you listen on live stream and you're not even going to be able to be part of these small groups. But you can find your own person, own friend, whatever, to have this conversation with. And so one of the ways to have this conversation is just where in your life, in your meditation life and your daily life out in the world, where do you find yourself operating from a fixed idea place where you're kind of entering the meditation or entering that meeting or entering that interaction with another person with a pretty solid idea of who you are, who they are, what's happening? And where in your life do you operate with more humility and sensitivity and curiosity and openness, where you're allowing things to be naturally undefined and unfixed? And just ask the question, how does that work for you? Those places that are more fixed and those places that are unfixed. And what would it look like to bring those wiser way of relating, of being unfixed, into the places where you tend to be more fixed and held and defined. So is that enough for the small group conversation? And again, there's so much power in having these real, useful conversations with our dear friends, especially people who have some kind of spiritual reflective practice. Even if they're not so a Buddhist or doing Buddhist meditation, there are people who are naturally reflective. They're using their capacity to be mindfully aware, and they're using that stability of present moment awareness to study the mind. That's the essence of what the Buddha taught. Stabilize your present moment awareness and use it to study the heart and mind. And in particular, use it to study how it is that suffering arises and how it is that suffering ceases. Anybody asks you, what was this guy Buddha teaching? Say, he taught the importance of stabilizing present moment awareness so that it feels good. There's a kind of pleasure in, and it's a funny word to use, but solidity about being present, because life is in motion, but that ability to be mindfully aware creates a kind of ground in a groundless world. I know it sounds weird to say it that way, but it's really our visceral sense when we have some momentum of that mindful awareness, we feel held in a funny way by that momentum of mindful awareness. It feels like protection and safety, even though our perception of our life is much more wild. We're so sensitive and we're sensing how everything is in motion, and yet we feel safer. And so, with that stability of mindful awareness, we get interested in the heart and mind. And in particular, we get interested in how it is that suffering arises and how it is that suffering ceases. Yeah, and this is really the essence of wisdom in Buddhist practice. And so the question for you to reflect on and share in the small groups and share with your Dharma friends or other friends who might be interested in this kind of conversation is, where in life do I live in a more fixed way, where I'm not interested in bringing that curiosity and that openness and undefendedness, where I feel like I have to be certain and tight, as opposed to humble and knowing that I don't know. Because another way that wisdom is talked about, and I think I mentioned this briefly last week, is the absence of fixed views. And so ignorance is when we're operating with fixed views, self-centered, arrogant, fixed views. And remember, our fixed view could be that I'm no good, right? That's a common fixed view for people to be living their life with, some sort of version of self-hatred. So fixed views, self-centered views, it isn't always like, I'm better than you. It could be just as much, I'm not as good as you. And even I'm the same as you is a fixed view, right? We don't need any. It seems like those fixed ideas give us solidity or ground, but all they really do is give us the stressful situation of having to defend my opinion and my fixed idea, right? It's always a burden to be living with a fixed view. And it doesn't mean we can't have a discussion about politics and have an opinion. It just means that the opinion that we put out there, we're holding lightly. Well, this is how I'm seeing things right now. But because we're not personally identified with that view that we just shared with the group, we're totally open to new information coming in. And in 2 minutes, we might have a different view about it. Now that hearing you, now it seems like this is how I see it right now. And it may be different down the road, I don't know. But right now, this is how I see it. And a lot of the times we feel at a disadvantage in the wider world when people operate with fixed views. It's sort of like, God, I need a fixed view, because they're going to win because they have this conviction that they're right, and I'm this wishy-washy Buddhist who, operates in the world. Well, let's see, or yeah, tell me what you have to say. I'll see how that might inform my own thinking on this right now. That kind of lack of fixed view. But you'll see, I think, as I'm still learning, in the same way, that there's a real power in it's like never feeling like we're there with certainty. And this is part of, we talk about anicca, which is translated as impermanence, or the ephemeral nature of everything. Like I said in the guided meditation, really discerning how everything is always in motion. So certainty isn't really in the mix for us humans. And whenever we try to bring in certainty, we always suffer. And that's some of the, you could bring this up in the small group, just give examples in your own life, like in a intimate relationship or in your relationship with one of your kids or with your parent. Whenever you tried to fix it, you and probably others suffered. And whenever we, in our relationships with life and each other, lived with a more open, undefined way, things seem to work better. Before we end, I wanted to read a few things, but I'll just mention that next week we'll have one more week talking about wisdom, and I'll do that in terms of the Four Noble Truths. This is another way in Buddhist practice that we understand what the Buddha means by panya, or wisdom. Right? It's really understanding specifically the lawfulness of how suffering arises and how it ceases. So some of you who know a little bit about Buddhism know that the Four Noble Truths are really a central teaching. But remember that it's not like when we say noble truth, it's not a metaphysical thing. It's really a way of orienting our mind. Like I mentioned, can we move through life interested in how it is that suffering arises, how it is that suffering ceases, and take responsibility. Like, this is a relevant task for me as a human being to start to get interested, like how it is that my heart gets tight, how it is that it releases. Is it always just external forces that are being dumped on me that are causing my suffering and the freedom from suffering? Or is it how my mind itself is participating in the moment? With what kind of understanding? With what kind of way of relating? So just to end, before we break into small groups with this teaching from the Buddha, this is from the Middle Length Discourses, number 26. Usually the title is translated, The Noble Search. And the Buddha is talking in this discourse, he's really talking about how we relate to suffering. Practitioner, there are these two searches. There's a way of searching that is liberating, and there's a way of searching that leads to more suffering. And this is in terms of our actual ordinary experience of suffering. And what is the unhelpful search? There is the case where a person, being subject themselves to birth, seeks happiness in what is likewise subject to birth. Being subject oneself to aging, illness, death, sorrow, defilement, one seeks happiness in what is also impermanent, like illness, death, sorrow, and defilement. And then he goes on to talk about all those things that we look to give us safety, like our partners. If only I have a solid partner who loves me and I can love, then I'll be somehow immune from the truth of uncertainty, the truth that everything changes. Or if only I have enough money, or if only I live in the right place where people treat me a certain way, or if only. So that's the, and the Buddha kind of summarizes that, like, why would we, when our own experience, our own subjective experience is sort of unfixed, Why would we seek safety in what is also unfixed? It doesn't make sense. What is also untrustworthy. And so he says, but there's a noble search, right? A search that is actually helpful. There is a case where a person, being subject to change, seeks something that doesn't change. The unborn, the unexcelled rest from the yoke of suffering, unbinding, right? Non-attachment, we could say in more plain English. Oneself being subject to aging, illness, death, sorrow, defilement, doesn't seek safety in what also is subject to change, but seeks it in something that is deathless, sorrowless, undefiled, unexcelled, unbinding. This is the noble search. I too, practitioners, before my awakening, when I was an unawakened bodhisattva, these are words, bodhisattva is technically, it means somebody on their way to being a Buddha, not yet a Buddha. So when the Buddha was still practicing to wake up, being myself subject to birth, I sought what was likewise subject to birth, being myself subject to aging, illness, death, sorrow, I sought happiness in what was likewise subject to illness, death, sorrow. The thought occurred to me, why do I, subject to impermanence, seek safety in what is also impermanent? Why not seek something, what does he say here? What if I, being subject to birth, seeing the drawbacks in birth, were to seek the unborn, unexcelled rest from the yoke, unbinding nibbana, right? So that's our invitation. The Buddha is modeling. And so what does wisdom seek? It seeks something that's here and now, a way of understanding here and now that is liberating. Because the problem is when we open to the wildness, the changingness of our experience, of heart, of body, of mind, we seek solidity in what can't provide solidity. And that is endlessly frustrating. So we seek harder to find safety in what can't provide safety. And that's endlessly frustrating. So we seek harder to find safety in what can't provide safety. And so we're endlessly frustrated. And that's samsara. That's our human life for the most part. And then wisdom is realizing this is not the way. Seeking safety. It doesn't mean I don't feed my body, doesn't mean I don't repair my house or take care of my relationships or be a good citizen. We still need to take care of this ordinary level of our life, but we don't expect it to provide this existential safety. We have to look somewhere else for that. Even as we take care of this ordinary business of feeding the body, taking care of our relationships, and on and on. And we find it in this activity. We don't have to go to a cave, although it does help if our life is somewhat simple, because when it's not, we get swept away by the details. So we need a little space, and I understand that is a privilege, because there are people who have I feel like I don't have enough space, and here I am, a Buddhist Dharma teacher, and if I don't have as much time and space to do my practice and to live a mindful life, that's, I guess it's on me. Like, what am I doing? Why don't I change? And that's really the question for all of us. How, in the responsibilities that we already have in our life, how can we create some space, even as we take care of those responsibilities, to look for this other way, this unbinding of how to be in the middle of the river? And it really has to do with desire. And it's not about eliminating desire. It's about understanding that desire is nature and not self. So I'll pick this up next week when we talk about the Four Noble Truths. And this could come up in the small groups too. This profound shift in how we relate to desire. Desire is like life energy. It's not going away. It doesn't need to go away. We wouldn't have a human life if we didn't have desire. Desire is sort of at the heart of our human life, but we misunderstand it. We're basically personalizing what is in fact a natural movement. So you can just start, get familiar with desire, what you might consider unwholesome desire and what you might consider wholesome desire. Get familiar with all of the ways desire moves and have a friendly, curious relationship with the desire and see it like a movement, like you were learning to feel the body as a movement and emotionality as a movement. Well, desire is also just a movement. And our job is not to be confused by this movement of desire. Oh yeah, this is the movement of desire. If you're attracted to somebody you shouldn't be attracted to because you're not going to have a sexual relationship with that person, you don't need to be afraid of that desire. You just need to understand what that desire is. Oh, of course, when I see someone like this, when I interact with a person like this, there is this desire. Okay, I can be sensitive to that desire without believing that I can't be happy unless I act on that desire. That's extra. I can have a healthy relationship with desire and not feel like I have to do anything about it. So that's enough for today. Just a little bit about the etiquette for our small groups. This is true whether you do the small group on your own with a dear friend, or you're going to stay for the Zoom groups, or you're here in our building. And I think today Ruth will be dividing people up into groups, or maybe there's just enough for one group. But the first thing you do is introduce yourself. It's nice to share your pronouns so people don't accidentally misgender anybody. Somebody agrees to go first. And we're really creating a sacred space. And one of the ways we do that is we give everybody 2 to 3 minutes. It's their time. Nobody interrupts, even if there's silence. Just be in your body as you hold that silent space, because the person whose turn it is to speak, they might pause for 20, 30, 50 seconds. That's totally fine. And then they might have more to say. Everybody gets 2 or 3 minutes. Once everybody has had a chance to share, then open discussion time. We hold in confidence what comes up in these small groups. And just, it's a wonderful experience of impermanence where a little community is born, can be so powerful and sweet, and then really be aware together of the dissolution when you say goodbye at the end. And just feel the poignancy of like, oh, that was nice, and now it's ending. Okay, so have nice groups for those who can stay. Nancy, are you the host today?
Hi, Mark. Yep, I'm here.
Okay, let me show